Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. And I believe everyone is doing well and safe. So, in this weekly discussion, the whole vision which I have planned to bring the people who are in industry having an experience from a different technology and how they adopted public cloud as well as maybe a private cloud understanding and share their experience. So you can drop your questions because there is a lot of myth going on, especially the people who just graduated and looking to start their career. They are looking that whether cloud will be a good fit or not, and even for the experience, the same kind of situation is there. So I have a bunch of other videos on my channel. As I mentioned, that every Saturday I'm doing such activities, and more will be coming soon. So subscribe to the channel. And just to share about our today's guest, so he played multiple roles from the CTO, the full technology point of view, to a CEO, and having an experience of more than 15 plus years, and now actively contributing and creating a quality content. So I always appreciate the people because creating a content is it requires a lot of effort. So let me bring on screen Andrew Brown, so then we can start our today's discussion. Hey Andrew, morning.
Hey, Chirag, how you doing? Is the
I'm
weather
good.
okay?
Yeah, everything fine. How about you? How's
Oh, good,
everyone?
good, good. Just a lot of snow around here, so I almost missed the live stream because I was shoveling, but I made it back in time.
Wow, great. And really, I'd like to thank you for accepting this invite. And I like your that background. Damn cool, man. So you are living in cloud, building cloud, sharing cloud. Great. So yeah, so let's start talking a bit on the your background, because as you play multiple uh, CTO role in the startups, and just would like to hear when the first time you interact with any public cloud platform and what was the motivation behind that, and just to hear more that what gave you the motivation to create a lot of quality content.
Great. Yeah, so when we're talking about, when did I jump into cloud and we go way back, I mean, before we had cloud, we had virtual private servers, right? And so there was things like Linode, DigitalOcean, Engine Yard, Rackspace, things like that. And so, those are all providers that I did use, prior to 2008. And so, around 2008, I started getting introduced to AWS. And at the time, I think they only had like three services or something. There was like S3, SQS, maybe EC2. I can't even remember, but I definitely remember we were using it for S3. And there was this huge push because of Silicon Valley to adopt it. All the startups were using it. And for me, I was a holdout. I just wanted to have my simple VPS. I didn't understand why we had to have all this complex networking layer. I was just building web applications, like I specialize in the ed tech market, building learning management systems.
Okay.
And so for me, it was just a large holdout for quite a long time. So I was using cloud services, but not like as my primary workload. I was still relying on virtual private servers. And you'd be surprised how much you can do with a VPS, like vertical scaling. Like you can do it. Doesn't mean you should, but like you can scale on a single virtual machine like a million users. Now,
Exactly.
that doesn't mean you should, but that was something that we were doing back in the day, and nobody was balking at it. But I never really understood why in Silicon Valley they cared about this rich ecosystem, especially when AWS was not the cheaper solution. It was actually slightly more expensive than virtual private servers. But times changed, and it became a more cost-effective option. Or I would say that maybe it wasn't cost-effective like one to one, but once you bought into the ecosystem, it definitely was, right? And there just became core services where I had problems in my prior startups, like getting DDoS. Do you know what I mean? It was one of
Yeah.
the hardest things to resolve. But now, if you're on cloud, you get that built in for free.
Right.
So,
Right. Yeah.
so I think about like it would have been like 2013, 14. That's where I started to run more of my primary workloads there. But even still, I wasn't super advanced at it. Like whatever I had was what I used. You know what I mean? Like I did not know how to configure VPCs because I'm again originally an application developer. And then I transitioned to CTO, and so I just never had to deal with all that infrastructure. So it was a bit of a struggle, but it was worth it once I learned all those basic things like cloud networking and things like that.
Okay, okay. Yeah, really great to hear. Like you mentioned about that you're coming from an application development, and then as you wear the hat of CTO, so like you are the in charge of entire technology as whatever the product that startup was building. So can you share, like you mentioned that, yeah, the learning curve. Can you share more about that? Because this is a question like I believe we all are hearing on a daily basis that a person is having some development experience, maybe it can be a Java, it can be a Power Builder, but how like you are able to made your mindset to learn the infrastructure, because there was no DevOps in a bigger way at that time, and infra as well as the development is considered separately.
Yeah,
So
DevOps was like you had a DevOps engineer and they wrote their bash scripts and they maintained them, and everything was I mean, nobody was using managed services, and people were really even afraid to use managed database services. I remember the emergence of those, and people said, why would I ever put my database on some kind of generic managed service like you think of Cockroach DB or DynamoDB? But now it's becoming more commonplace and trusted because you didn't want that vendor lock-in. People really believed in open source, and now it's more like, well, people want convenience. um in terms of like the learning curve, for me it was a bit like it is steep, I guess, at the beginning if you don't know networking. For me, that was the largest obstacle, was just dealing with VPCs. And at the time, there wasn't a lot of wizardry around it, like automation, where if you want to use any of the cloud service providers, they made strong defaults so you don't have to think about it. But at the time, you literally had to go create your VPC. And at least that's what I remember, or I had to do some kind of tweaking in there. And so that was mostly my struggle, dealing with that. And then also, it pushed more about having stateless applications or having a workload like running multiple machines. And if you can get away with not running multiple machines, it just saves you so much difficulty as an application developer, right? It's just thinking about a single box. So, in terms of time, I think it took about 2 to 3 months in order to really fully understand the ecosystem. But even still, it was like it took, a year as continuing learning to really understand, what parts really did make sense. Like, what were the things cloud that were actually true and what were untrue, right? Just because AWS or any provider says, this is the best solution doesn't necessarily mean that. You have to use it and learn and go, oh, okay, maybe this isn't the best.
great, great. Yeah, I believe you covered a lot of important points. So let me summarize and maybe would like to hear more on that part. Like you mentioned that not every solution is best. So as a CTO, you need to take a very you can say decision on your requirement basis. So can you give more such thing that yes, 10-year back, maybe 12-year back, AWS don't have that rich console experience or not that feature richness. Maybe I believe you're talking the era of classic VPC that was I believe before 2013, if I remember, 2014, because those were the days when I started seeing the AWS console, but you are kind of a very early adopter here. So just to share, like you mentioned about vertical scaling. Till date, yes, people are still thinking that why to do maybe the horizontal scaling, and then you talk bit on the stateless part. So what are the importance of all these things? So can you share from that point of view that
I,
on
I,
what basis
I,
the decision need to be taken care? Yeah.
I mean, I guess that's where we talk about microservices, right? And I mean, it depends on what you want to define microservices as. But back then, it's like microservice could just mean I'm running multiple virtual machines and I have, a database that is specifically dedicated, like like everything is on its own server, which at the time just seemed a little bit crazy because like that's a lot of resources to spread across all these things. Like, why have very dedicated resources? But I think that as more cyber attacks became more sophisticated, so like isolation became a lot more important, and people started to learn where the sticky parts were. It's like, okay, databases should really be always on their own thing because they're like you can lose your app, but you can't lose your data, right? If you lose your data, you don't have a company anymore. So there became a larger focus of having those isolate and having those highly scalable. And I think a lot of people's approach was to do vertical scaling first and then horizontal scaling afterwards. But like, I think that, what AWS, GCP, and Azure taught us was that really, it's more like going up steps. So it's horizontal, vertical, or however you want. Like there's like why would you increase the size of your virtual machine to be 3 times the size when you can have 3 of the same size across 3 availability zones and you get that fault tolerance, right? But I think the thing was is that a lot of people were used to building an app in a particular way, and they weren't used to having to deal with the fact that like sticky sessions, knowing like persisting a session or dealing with session or identity was always a very difficult thing for people to figure out. And for
Mhm.
whatever reason, the ecosystem became a lot better in terms of building stateless applications. And once the community figured that out, then horizontal scaling was not so much friction, right, and became the norm. So I don't know. I think just as a community, we involved to be able to better adopt, that kind of architecture.
Yeah, obviously, I think the proven reference cases is always required to convince any business owner that yes, these kind of things can work out, and there are so and so forth companies out there, they are running their product. So I have a curiosity now to understand that. Can you share like your experience around what you see the difference? Let's say when you started the timeline of 2008 to 2015, and in last 6 years, how the public cloud adoption and what are the major differences you are able to found, like what was now your learning curve and mind thought process around this, which was like 10 year ago there was very few services. Now we are talking about maybe 200 plus services in any of the major public cloud providers. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, it's just when you have ever built an application, like when we started to see the emergence of cloud services, and people would like they really didn't want to have to do anything. They would start with Heroku, and they started making patchwork of all these different kinds of providers. Like, let's say you wanted a CDN, so you went with Fastly. Let's say you wanted, like to have asset delivery, so like with something more complex. I think it's called Cloudery. I can't always pronounce it, but my point was is that there was all these cloud service vendors, but they didn't live under a single unified API. They all had different kinds of pricing models. And so when cloud service providers said, hey, we're going to give you, maybe it's not as great as these other individualized services like Pusher or whatever, but the idea is that you have a single unified API. It has metered billing, right? So it's kind of like having utilities for your house as opposed to managing multiple subscriptions. And the idea is that the usage of cost is exactly what it is. Even if it is expensive, at least it's exactly what you use is what you pay for. And so when and everything was powered by, again, single unified API. So like you could write things like infrastructure as code and set things up and automate stuff. And so all those factors, all those benefits of cloud just made it irresistible for people to use them. And they said, okay, I don't have maybe the best of all cloud services, but I have the best combination of cloud services. And so I think just companies going through, pain, being like, okay, how do we, manage permissions, right? And so, well, AWS has IAM, they have fine grade permissions. How do we handle authentication? Like now that we want to build more microservices or applications that are more distributed across multiple virtual machines, and our front ends or back ends are separated. Like, is there a managed decentralized authentication service, right? S3 is like probably the entry for everybody into AWS because it's like not having to deal with disk drives and things like that. So, I think it's just that, the community had became a lot better at using a lot of these tools, and they just wanted to stop maintaining all these open source things on their own virtual machine. And then once you had two machines, like it just became almost impossible to maintain those yourself. So using managed services is like a super winner. Like again, I'm a Ruby on Rails developer, so everything was framed around that. We used to use Sidekick, and Sidekick
okay.
was a really good message queue, and it was it leveraged Redis, so it was super fast. But we'd always have to deal with like like the queue getting stuck or memory leaks because of Ruby. And when SQS is just sitting there, sure, it's not even as fast as Sidekick, but like
Okay.
having to remove all that time, because what's the most expensive thing to your time is engineering time, right? And so you free up that engineer, and now they can go focus on business generating activities as opposed to maintaining stuff. It just makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. I believe that is the biggest value proposition what a public cloud is providing. That yeah, reducing the time where the development team can focus more on what the business requirement is and they can plan rather than managing the infrastructure. Okay, so I would like to discuss with you around the area that nowadays, because again the cloud is growing huge. Even a day back we read lot of news, I think the quarterly or the annual result of growth for Microsoft and Google is growing. Amazon is also growing, I believe under 40% or somewhere, if I remember the number correctly. So for a person, let's take maybe anyone experience from a application development point of view. If he or she wants to change the career or start their cloud learning journey, so whether they need to dig for all three or all maybe major five at the same time, or like what need to be the pattern a person need to be follow to build a confidence so that they can understand and they can maybe get a new job.
If we were 4 years ago and we were saying what would be your strategy to get into cloud, you tack cloud onto the name, call yourself a cloud developer, and you would learn one particular provider like AWS. So maybe you would start with Elastic Beanstalk. Serverless architectures, microservice architectures were not as well developed as they are now, or having the same amount of resources or ease of tooling. And
Okay.
so it made sense to just have your monolithic application on a platform as a service like Elastic Beanstalk or something like that, and to start bolting on AWS services like S3, SQS, things like that. But we have greatly evolved since then, since 4 years ago, and multi-cloud seems to be highly prevalent, just because when we, like the promises we hear about cloud service providers never going down. Well, I'm going to tell you, we've seen them
Yeah.
go down plenty times. They're being secure. You know what I mean? So like, as larger organizations have adopted cloud, they've realized that they want to run their workloads. They want to have the best of services across the board, right? So they're willing to have it like use services specifically GCP, like BigQuery, or maybe they're like Vertex AI, and they'll be over in Azure. Maybe that's where they use their secondary workload for running their organization, like MDM to manage mobile devices, or they find managing resources very easier. They want to use Windows virtual machines, right? And then maybe they want to run their primary workload over on AWS because it's like Legos. So I think that a lot of organizations, they learned one cloud, and now they have the knowledge of working with multiple ones. So the bar is really hard for people to come in. And so as an educator, we just would say, okay, instead of just focusing on teaching a single cloud, let's teach those fundamental cloud concepts and then show how they apply across the board. Because when I started jumping, and it's actually you that got me motivated to try other cloud providers, because I saw you doing so many different ones. And so I jumped over. I tried Oracle, because you were sharing about like Oracle being free at one point. So I did Oracle, and I went, okay, there was a lot of stuff over here, but I learned things that I never would have learned if I never left the AWS ecosystem, that they were never telling me about, right? Like
Right.
how like language and business and stuff like that. And so then I went over to Azure. I learned like a whole lot of stuff there. I went to GCP. I learned the whole stuff there. I went over to HashiCorp. I learned the whole stuff there. Right now I'm in cloud native, and it's unbelievable how much overlap there is. I mean, there's obviously differences, but it's I think the new wave of cloud instruction will be creating like these fundamental mental models to then
Yeah.
apply it to all of them. And so I think it is possible to learn all of the cloud at the same time, but it just nobody has engineered that content, so it doesn't sound possible, right?
Yeah, yeah, agree. Like you mentioned about again the nowadays the fundamentals are again remain same, and it's just maybe a terminology, and obviously there is a difference between each cloud provider. And again, just to share, the people who are right now watching or going to watch, Andrew have created lot of courses around the fundamental area, because all the major cloud provider are having a fundamental or entry level certification. More on the certification we are going to talk, but you can connect with him. I drop his LinkedIn profile link in the description, as well as he started his own new venture 3 to 4 year back, and he's creating a lot of cool stuff, and maybe few more secret things we are going to know in coming few minutes. So yeah, so understanding the fundamental is more important. So what the tips you want to give, that how to become a cloud architect or cloud solution architect, because that is kind of a things coming day in day out, and you as from the business owner interacting with lot of people, building your team, and you are taking interviews. So what kind of quality, or I can say skill set, you try to test, and what's your point of view?
So when we talk about terms cloud architect, solutions architect, cloud engineer, they all kind of hang around the same realm. I think that the definition is going to change. Some organizations are using that title where one would be a cloud engineer, one would be a solution architect. So I would just say that first, when you're going out into your journey into cloud, if you think you're really pinned on cloud engineer, just kind of broaden the roles that you're looking into, because organizations are not standardized in terms of how they use it, right? Just look at the job description and say, okay, does this match what I think a cloud engineer would be, regardless of if it's cloud engineer as the title? Okay, so broaden your search in terms of those terms. We don't have standardization, and there is a bit of a disagreement in terms of what goes into those components. But talking in those three broad categories, these are generalized roles where you need to have broad fundamental skills. You have to have architecting skills, so being able to not just know how to use services, but also know how to use these services so that they are cost effective, so that they meet your compliance guidelines, that they fit the business use case in terms of the time constraints and things like that. But it's also about having a lot of confidence, because just because you architect something doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work out. As an application developer, once you've learned stuff and you've built it once, you know that you can build the same app again and again and again and again. That's not like how it is with cloud, because it's like clouds in the sky that are always moving. So is the cloud. And so you have to really have confidence and really be like, okay, I know the fundamentals of this thing, so it should work. And always plan that things are going to not work out, and have don't bank on your first solution to work. Build it out into steps, see where the limitations are, do technical exploration, and try to find where those technical dead ends, and try to make the best choice for your business. So there's a lot of guesswork, right? And I would say that because you don't know, just kind of jump into it and start experimenting. Don't go and read a book and study it end to end and hope and think that you're ready to go. It's like Gregor, who's in our cloud community. He uses the analogy of imagine learning to fly a plane. You can't just read the manual end to end, jump in a plane, and fly from Toronto to Singapore. You're going to crash. So you have to go clock in those flight hours every day, probably maybe even with somebody if possible. Like group learning or get validation. So that's why we talk about learning in the open, to get validation that you're on the right path. And I think that, that's where you're going to get there. One thing that you wouldn't think that is very important is communication, because things are a lot more complex. It involves a lot more different types of team members. You have to really, really be good at communication and documentation, right?
I
And so
totally agree on this part, because yeah, it's not just a technical part, but with the adoption of cloud, the new terminologies and the setting a right expectation is the most important part, and communication plays a major role. I truly agree, because that is what my background is also, because I am into always into the customer facing role. So understanding the customer expectation and the team expectation is always a major part. Yeah.
and having and really upping your language skills, like in terms of like cloud vocabulary and concepts and paradigms and mantras and things like that, are really going to help you wrangle your team in order to get to the solution they need. So like if you're on GCP, they tell you all about digital transformation, which is great. And then when you go over to AWS, they're all about being customer obsessed, right?
Yeah.
And then when you go over to Azure, it's just like lots and lots and lots of business focused content, right? Like when you open up the AWS documentation guides, it's like pure technical documentation for isolate services. When you open up the Azure's documentation, it's like always business use case driven.
Right.
And so you kind of see like why certain industries and verticals kind of gravitate towards particular clouds, But I'm just saying, use all that language in your arsenal. And the only way you're going to do that is if you learn a bit of each of the cloud.
Great, great. I believe you cover a lot of things to understand. Yeah, first of all, obviously, a fundamental is required, and understanding the true job description, because maybe in one organization, a cloud architect may have a different roles he or she need to play, but in the other is different. But again, fundamental, I totally understand that your fundamental always play a major role. Okay, just to cover a one question here. So I believe so a person is asking, a cloud engineer needs a system architect skills, or only with the infrastructure could be enough.
So the
So
way so
yeah.
the way I define a cloud engineer, and I actually have it's on my blog, imcloud.dev. I have a Venn diagram where I show the intersections of roles of how I define them. And a cloud engineer can do a little bit of everything, right? So they need to be able to do architecture. They need to be able to write infrastructure. They need to be able to do cloud programming, cloud scripting, things like that. It's like the most general possible role. Now, do you need to be super proficient in it? No, but you need to be able to, get people like if nobody can do that role, you need to be able to do your best job to carry the company forward. And so I look at solution architect as kind of a specialization in architecture and communication and documentation, right? And leadership skills and things like that. People might flip those two titles around, but the reason I do that is because solution architect is usually a more senior role. You don't see junior solutions architect very often. And so the junior solution architect is the cloud engineer. Same thing with DevOps. If you are a DevOps engineer, that can be sometimes a more senior role. They're starting to change. We're seeing more junior DevOps roles, but I always view the cloud engineer as your junior DevOps role. So all those things like that. But yes, infrastructure is something you need to know how to do, not just architect it, but have familiarity with it. Now, does that mean you're going to be building complex infrastructure life cycles? Maybe we would leave that for the DevOps engineer, or we would architect it, build some of it, prototype it out, and hand it over to them, and they would polish it off.
Yeah, I think it's really important to understand all these things, because this is what made a mindset and the journey for any person. Uh, I want to cover one question here. So a person is asking, how can I get a job offer after got a certification? Because see, certification is always, it's like a chicken and egg problem which we find every day on social media going. And with the boom of cloud, the cloud certification become a new norm, and everyone is trying to put efforts and trying to do, but still, yeah. So the dilemma is always there, that how to get a job even. So
So,
because yeah, you created a lot of content, so I believe you are the best person to share your point of view. Yeah.
so the thing is, we did Twitter Spaces where we're like getting hired by AWS, getting hired by Microsoft, getting hired VMware, getting hired at Google Cloud, and I'm still doing more of these. And we always ask, the first thing we ask is like, do certifications matter? And it's a yes and it's a no, right? It's dependent on the role, right? So if you there's I think we could say there's three divisions of cloud roles. We have building the cloud itself, so building the cloud. Then there's building on top of the cloud, and then there's tech adjacent roles, right? So when I say tech adjacent roles, we traditionally would say non-technical roles, but I'm trying to separate that language to distinguish between someone that's a lawyer and someone that's a technical program manager. So technical program manager is somebody that would work with cloud engineers, DevOps engineers, solutions architects, other all sorts of technical members to organize a project. So they might go get the certified cloud practitioner to understand what all this stuff is, but they don't ever have to do any of it. They need to be able to do project management, right? And so for them, having a combination of their traditional certifications, I'm trying to remember, there's like one for Scrum and there's one for program, like being a program manager. Like for them, it's a hard requirement. You cannot get a job very easily, especially at established companies, without those technical adjacent certifications. Now, but when we talk about the cloud side, like it's not a hard requirement, but it's a nice to have because it just proves that you can manage the skills. So we don't see like a hard cap in our industry for cloud certifications. Like, oh, in order to have this job, you have to have this. There are some exceptions like CompTIA certifications where government organizations like they want to see that Security Plus or things like that. but that's the public sector, and that is a very niche vertical for cloud, right? So I always say, certifications are great to shortlist you for roles, but they aren't the role, right? Like on the job, no one's gonna, like, if you want to set up your infrastructure, it's not going to be a multiple choice question, right? So like, just all we know is that you've gone through a journey, and you have a baseline level of skills. So I know that you've taken the time to broadly understand cloud. And so it might show good understanding of cloud, being able to describe and see the entire landscape. But in terms of being able to put it into practice, you might have to go build a cloud project, like especially for cloud engineered roles. Like you want to go build a cloud project, because then you can talk about it and show how well you understand or have actually
Hands-on experience. Yeah.
hands-on experience, right? It's no different than when you're going for like a programming job, and they want to see you either have a programming project, they talk about you, and also demonstrate that you have those skills by giving you programming challenges, right? So certifications are like, they serve a purpose. They help give you structured learning, but they're not there to help you land the role, right? Like they're just going to help you shortlist. It's part of your journey. It's just, don't go crazy.
Sure, I totally agree. Like you share very important part. Like certifications are just can open a door for an interview, but it is not itself a role. That is, I believe, the very important part
At
here.
my company it is. At my company it is, but I make certification courses, right? Like for us, we
Yeah.
would want to hire someone that has certifications, because we are literally building out courses to help pass them. But in everything else, it doesn't make sense. Now, if you are a solutions architect for an organization and you're doing consultancy, you might have motivation to do it for customers. So this is where the only time I heard with like companies where they said, yeah, the only time we'd like to hear people having certifications is when they have to deal with customers, and customers can have verifiable skills to say, okay, they have this hands-on experience and they also have these certifications. So I know a lot of people in consultancy where they're stacking professionals, stacking specialties, to show that they're keeping up to date, right? But they already have. It's not that what got them the job. They already have the hands-on experience. They're just continually developing, right? And again, it's optional.
Yeah. I believe like you give a very detailed answer, and the people who are watching or going to watch, I believe it will be helpful for each and everyone to understand that where and how to position any certification in your resume, in your profile. Now, another important question I want to hear, like you mentioned about big for a cloud architect, a hands-on experience is required. So to build any project recommendation you want to share, like maybe to covering up maybe basic services. So any thoughts around that
Yeah,
area?
so there's some resources out there. There's Be a Better Dev. He has a few videos where he suggests, it's specifically for AWS, but he might show some architectures that would be good to start with. So one would be like build a WordPress application. Another one is like consuming content from a third-party API and processing that data. Forrest Brazil, I don't know if I'm saying his last name right, but he works at GCP and he's known for the Cloud Resume Challenge. So he has examples there. And those are really good for associate level. So if you're like junior role and you're looking for your first projects to do, those are ones to check out. I'm working on something with Cloudborg where we're going to have more rich real world projects, because the difficulty with a lot of projects out there is that you can go watch a video and go build it end to end. But the problem is everybody will have the same video and have the same project. And the other problem is you're watching a video. So like, they know that you were on the rails like the entire time. And where the real experience comes from is people that don't have projects, because in the real world, you're going to be thrown in there. You just have to figure it out. So the best project is the one that you engineer yourself. So like you might have a concept for one and elements that you should have in it. But if you're watching a video end to end, like you're just cheating yourself of the hard parts. But that's the problem, is like cloud can be extremely frustrating and you have to put a lot of hours in on hard parts that aren't fun. But that's what the companies want to hire you for, to know that you can get through that stuff. If you can't do that or show that, why would they hire you? Because you can't keep on going back to your boss and saying, oh, I couldn't do this because I couldn't find a video on it.
Right,
That's not
right.
good,
I
right?
believe, yes. I had a same kind of experience that, yeah, like you mentioned about a kind of a the build fast fail fast rule here, because that is what the commodity hardware or the infrastructure which we are getting from any cloud platform. Following a video, it will be obviously proven steps, like there will be very less chances that the troubleshooting will be there. But if we started anything from scratch, and for sure we will we will face some issue, and that will eat lot of hours. That is where, like you are mentioning about the frustration with the cloud platform. But I am kind of a witness that, yeah, I had a such kind of experience back in 2015, 14, 15, when I was watching some videos, learning, preparing, and I had a certification at that time, Microsoft, as well as the initial GCP one. But in an interview, I was not able to clarify that if I really configure Apache configuration file or Nginx configuration file by my own, because the max I know was sudo apt install. Like previous versions is sudo apt get install. So that is the max my understanding was. But yeah, it took me also a few years that yes, I can do if I do an installation, but what is the whole purpose to install?
So
Installation was just a copy paste command for me. Yeah.
So like a year or two ago, I had a lot of we were hiring for cloud engineers for some of my partnered companies, and we were doing the hiring, and we had a lot of people that did the cloud resume challenge, and they were getting frustrated because because we were saying it wasn't enough, and they're like, but I took this thing and I did it and I can prove that I did it, but I was like, well, what happens when I have 6 or 7 more of them? So I'm not saying that these aren't good to do. I think that doing the cloud resume challenge is good, but you got to go beyond it, right? So like if that's what gets you there, then you have to go well beyond. It's just a starting point if you can't get started. So like when I'm looking at it, it's like, okay, let imagine that you had to do SOC 2 compliance. How would that affect your application? Because that's a real world scenario.
Yes.
Okay, show us a decentralized authentication, right? Like if you build an app, try one with Okta or Azure A2B2C or stuff like that, and see how that affects your application. So I would just say it's like if you take on trying to create a real project, like imagine you are your own company and you're building a real thing, you're going to start hitting things that real companies hit. But if you look at it as like a toy app as a demonstration, you're never
Mhm.
going to hit those parts that companies really care about. My whole career of me getting jobs is me building out real world projects for companies that don't have to go anywhere. Like my current company, which is Teacher Seat, Exam Pro, is a learning platform, right? I
Right.
have all these organizations that, I can get acqui-hired and they want my technology because I'm already solving it, or they already know that I can solve it, the hard parts, right? And I think that's where, you're going to have a lot more job availability if you can demonstrate that. People worry, they say like, well, I don't want to build this one thing and be, I want to like this job wants this thing. But I think that if you focus on doing something really well in one area, you broadcast that out, those job opportunities will find you. You don't even have to go chase for them.
Great, great. Yeah, I believe, yeah, that will be helpful to understand more that to have that mindset, it's not just finishing any course, but maybe thinking beyond that and try to play and figure it out that how the industry is facing, and that is where the community part also come into picture. So again, just want to share, guys. So Andrew is running a challenge also, 100 days of cloud. Many people joined that, try to learn one thing a day and then try to post it. So that is what I believe the communities are playing a major role. And thanks to Andrew for being always a true contributor and motivating everyone. Okay, I have a one question. Like this came in my mind because like you are coming from an application background, then you learn the infrastructure part, and recently you have created a course around Microsoft Azure certification, which is around AI 900. So, what
Mm-hmm.
was the motivation behind, and how you was able to leverage your experience to learn the AI? Because that is something personally I also concerned that I am the infra guy. I know infra. Learning AI, I need to know maybe I don't know mathematics or machine learning things. So can you share like your journey behind that, and then you are able to create, I believe, few are long course around that. So yeah, yeah.
When you see me produce a free course, it's actually because I'm trying to apply it for a particular use case. It's not always just like I'm making a course to make money or whatever. It's I actually have an application for it. So when I was making the AI 900, I wanted to see what the limits of managed AI services were, because for our organization or company teacher seat, we wanted to build a online secure exam system. And we
Okay.
wanted to see if we could reduce the cost. Like, let's say we produced our own cloud certification, and the goal was to reduce the cost of an exam, because when you look at something like Pearson VUE or PSI online, it's at least always $100, at least. And then the other ones can be up to $400. And so one of the largest costs is the proctor itself, right? Having somebody sit there and watch you. So what if we had an AI assisted proctor? So you still have a proctor, but you can leverage AI services to like analyze the screen and see if they're cheating and create patterns and things like that. And so, I could have done with AWS, but because Azure had a certification for it, then I had double the reason to use it, right? Because then I could recycle it as learning content, generate revenue,
Right.
and also have free content for the community as well. And so when I explored that, Azure, and I can't remember the term, but they had a really good mental model to understand the applications for AI for like all this automation in your business. And so I discovered that I could use AI services, manage AI services. So for instance, like when a user goes to an online proctored system, they have to get their government ID verified, right?
Right.
And there is a managed AI service for Azure that lets you do that, where they already have a database of like being able to analyze government IDs and extract that information. And so that was there, right? Or being able to do face detection, right? So they had an SDK that goes to their face API service, and it will allow me to see like whether people are looking off screen, looking in a particular direction, looking down at their keyboard, things like that, and actually detect it. And so that's where I made that service. And so our secure online exam system does use managed services, and we're not using the Azure ones. We're actually using the AWS ones. But I took that knowledge from there, and then I went over to AWS, and then I said, okay, do they have equivalent services? Yes, they do. And that's where our primary stack is. And we built it out, and we now have an AI assisted proctor. I have a machine learning course that I haven't released out that I developed last May. It's the AWS machine learning specialty. I made that because for one of my companies, we had to build out an ML pipeline, and we
Wow.
had a data scientist, and they didn't know how to deploy it. So we basically had to make we made it for ML ops. So the examples that we use in that course, which is not out yet, is for a real world example. So I don't just do search for no reason. I do them because I'm trying to build something.
Great, great. I believe like this is the most important insight like you shared. Create the business problem and then try to solve that area rather than just jumping and thinking that maybe some basic thing or straightforward thing which a person can find easily in a documentation or some other forums. So I believe yeah, we need to discuss more on that part because you gave a very realistic example that you understand there is some maybe a cost concern for the different certification provider, and that is what you think the opportunity for you to do something, to build something which can be again a full-fledged business model as well as solving the concerns which other platforms are having. So really appreciate. So okay, just now to hear from you like I because we are connected for almost 2 to 3 years I believe on social media, and I believe you are a very big advocate of serverless. So what's your point of view, like what kind of opportunities are there, whether how long the serverless is going to work, or like there is any big scope for such area, and any certification because you created a very beautiful logos if I remember around
Mm-hmm.
that what you are maybe looking or expecting. So yeah, anything
In
on this.
terms of the serverless certification, I've just been paving the way towards it. So I developed, like, the first thing with serverless is that the technology is ready. It's ready to utilize, and the convenience is nearly there. It's just convincing people to use it by creating shared knowledge, right? Like getting everyone upskilled as quickly as they can with practical examples. And so people keep asking AWS to make an AWS serverless certification, and for whatever reason, they have yet to do so. They made an SAP one, which I guess is okay because SAP is like EDPR, EDR. You know what I'm talking about. I can't remember the initialism, but that stuff is very popular. But for serverless, it's hard because like AWS basically has the best ecosystem for that. And then you have GCP and Azure, and GCP, it's okay, but like when you do serverless with GCP, it's more like using Firebase. And then Azure is like more business oriented. So like I don't see people building applications out, but when they're building out like pipelines and integrations between services and internal applications, Azure Functions is really great for that. So when we're talking about building applications, it's probably going to be more AWS focus. And so when you see me like, why haven't I made the serverless certification? Because I could have made it like a year and a half ago. But the reason why is because I'm just trying to make sure that I understand the scope of everything out there first. So I said, okay, if I build a serverless certification, should I build it for all providers or just be AWS? Or should I include external software like that? So I had to explore that. I went, okay, well, how do we deploy this stuff? Especially if it's cross cloud. So that's why I went into Terraform, is specifically to figure out is because I'm trying to figure out what is the best way to teach people. And then I go, okay, well, there's Kubernetes, right? Kubernetes is an alternative to serverless in a sense, right? And technically Kubernetes has a serverless layer like Knative and OpenPass and stuff like that. And so once I'm done my KCNA course, I've pretty much done my due diligence to make sure, okay, great. Serverless is a thing that we should be investing our time in, and what would be the most fair and balanced perspective. And that's where then I will engineer a serverless certification course. But yeah, so I probably will make it as an AWS one because I think and like have some things with other providers lightly so people are familiar with it. But I think it will be an AWS serverless certification course, and it will show you how to build an application with all the layers available, right? If that helps. Sorry.
Not sure. Yeah, obviously, I believe that is the good idea because again, you touched the same point that the references and it's a proven thing. It is not something that I believe there are many customer references out there which people can read on the AWS use cases or case studies as well as the other cloud provider. But it's all about that how to build that business requirement and proven technology is there. Okay, I want to pick a one question from the chat that what would you think more intermediate and advanced content? It is becoming easy to find introductory material. What are your thoughts on that?
So the key thing we're seeing is data center on the cloud, and I think that was Wally. I didn't see the last name, but I believe it's Wally, our Kubernetes
Yeah.
friend. Yeah, it
Yeah.
is. Okay, and
Okay.
so like when we're talking about data centers, and I'm a cloud native person, so like I have to clarify. So when I say cloud native, there's a bit
Uh-huh.
confusion because when we talk about cloud native, that can be talking about the Kubernetes
Kubernetes,
and all
yes.
these other, not just Kubernetes, but there's a whole suite of distributed applications. But when I was introduced to AWS, they described cloud native as just meaning that you didn't start with a data center. You always started, and I guess it means the same thing, but being cloud first, right? And so when we look at data centers, I don't know a whole lot in that area. Like there's Red Hat, OpenStack,
Yeah,
right? And
OpenShift.
OpenShift. I always get confused because there's OpenStack and there's OpenShift. Like
Yeah, OpenStack is a kind of building a private. Yeah, it's an open source
well,
project, and I believe
but
that
it's
is where
private. But
yeah,
OpenShift is it
it's
the
a
engine for Kubernetes or I can't remember?
yes. It is kind of
Okay,
a Red Hat provided
sure.
commercially grade Kubernetes engine.
Oh,
Yeah,
it's sorry.
something
And
like
OpenStack is by Rackspace. It's the confusion of those two names. I think OpenStack's by Rackspace, right?
Mirantis, if I remember it now,
Let me
Mirantis.
double check.
Yeah,
OpenStack. I
yeah.
always get this mixed up. I'm pretty sure it was developed originally by Rackspace.
Okay,
I
okay.
think so.
Yeah,
Yeah, it
I
is. Yeah.
remember the
Okay.
days like Rackspace was very much into the cloud platform, and I maybe a 7 to 8 year back, I subscribe. I started the trial, and I see the console of Rackspace, and after that, I think
Yeah.
2015 16 timeline. I don't know, like they are no longer in the market of public cloud, but yeah,
Well,
I saw their console. Yeah.
I mean, I think it varies because there are regions of the world where they are shy of using public cloud providers like AWS, Azure, GCP, and so it's not that they're not open to cloud technologies. They just want to use their own public cloud like OpenStack privately installed. But besides OpenStack, I would imagine that probably like VMware probably has like a solution that you can deploy on their own stuff. But I think that a lot of these people are probably leaning towards cloud native solutions like Kubernetes and these distributed services. And I think that's what data centers are using. And actually, when I'm talking about cloud, I'm not just talking about cloud service providers. And I kind of look at it like it's kind of like they're the same thing, but they're a split. So you have cloud service provider. Technically, there's three if you want to look at it. You have cloud platforms. So they might have like a few services, or they're in a very particular specialization. So think of like Twilio or Databricks or things like that.
Snowflake, yeah,
Snowflake. And then you have your true cloud service providers, AWS, Azure, GCP, and then those have different tiers, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3.
yeah.
And then you have cloud native solutions where they can run on cloud service providers, cloud platforms, or there's even community like open source toolings there. So, I mean, that is the landscape of it. But in terms of what data centers are running, I don't know. I have to talk to more of my data center friends. So,
Okay,
yeah.
great. Yeah, okay. So I'm just going to take a one last question. And yes, as a cloud engineer, any specific programming skill needed like Ansible, Terraform, Python, or go for automation project? So,
Sure. So, I mean, we're here cloud engineer, and then we heard a lot of DevOps engineer tools there. But when we talk about cloud programming, there's cloud programming, and then we have application programming. So, a lot of people, when they're talking about cloud, they're worried about it because they think they have to build an application like web applications, right? Or have deep programming knowledge. And the truth is, you don't. Like if you are in a cloud engineer role and you're not building out application code, you need to have basic or like the fundamentals of programming in general, like loops, classes, functions, and things like that. And then you pretty much have to do a lot of copy paste of SDKs, right? So like when you are utilizing AWS, they have the AWS SDK. You go to the documentation, they have tons of examples. You copy paste them in. And it's that simple. But the other thing is that you have to know not just one programming language, but multiple programming languages, because there are going to be cases where you are forced to use a particular language because the service provider doesn't have coverage. So like, AWS has like for
most
their
of that,
SDK, they
yeah,
have
yeah.
they have all the languages. They even having Rust, like they have Ruby. You go over to like Azure, they don't have Ruby. So if you're like, I'm a Ruby programmer, so like I have to now use, what's the next thing I use? I guess Python, right? But then you go over to like CloudFront and you want to do an edge function, right? Land to edge. It's only in JavaScript, right? Or let's say you want to do a Kinesis producer. Like the best way to write that is with Java, or you want to make a connection like to Red Hat. Maybe it's only this Java library that you have to use, or you're in the Windows ecosystem. All the tooling is built around PowerShell. So the idea is that it's like just like one of the approach of learning cloud is the same with cloud programming. You should learn a little bit of each one and be flexible and don't care. Like just you'll be doing a lot of copy pasting and you might not understand it fully. Like every time I use JavaScript, they have the concept of promises and I can never get it right. But you know what I mean? It's like, fine, I'll just go over and write it in Python. So I think you just have to have be desensitized to what you use, because things are always ever shifting. It's just what it is.
Yeah. Yes.
So just about those tools like Terraform, Ansible, stuff like that. Again, it comes back to the concept. If you understand infrastructure as code, you should be able to move from CloudFormation to Terraform, right? Or Ansible if you've ever used Chef or Puppet, Ansible or Salt or whatever. It's just like it's the concepts of those that are going to drive you, because you're never going to get what you want to use when you go to a company. Do you know what I mean? Like it's just too varied.
I think yeah, that is a real scenario. It's not that every company is using every of these tools. There is always again according to the team building to what I can say. Uh, Choice on the tools is depend upon the team skills and maybe from the leadership and management point of view also. So I think knowing fundamentals that yes, in which let's say cloud provider what SDKs are available, that is kind of a research work as a cloud developer or architect need to do. And nowadays the documentation is great and anyone can get to know that what are the you can say pros and cons there, and according to that take a decision and make their own learning curve.
Well,
Okay, yeah.
well,
So
and I mean, like, we come back to certifications. It's like you want to show you can learn fast. Like, here, I did this. I did it in 2 weeks, right? Like they go, okay, you got the baseline skill. Like if you already have, but that's again paired with practical knowledge. You go, I know I'm very good at CloudFormation, and I took the Terraform course, but I don't use it day to day. They go, okay, this person's going to be able to accelerate, move over here, right? That's kind of like the thing that we talk about. So,
great. I believe all the tips you have given is helpful, and people are going to leverage that. Any last thoughts you want to share before we wrap up the session?
If you want to accelerate your cloud journey, the best way is to join the community, be part of the discussion, create content yourself, and make friends. There's Twitter, there's LinkedIn, there's Discord, there's Slack. There's no reason to learn in isolate. There's a lot of opportunity for you to collaborate and to upskill a lot faster. You can't just do it in isolate. If you want to get a job in a particular locality, you have to be part of that community and understand how that ecosystem is. Toronto, what we want in Toronto is not the same that they want in Singapore or anywhere else in the world. So you really do have to tap into your local market and start broadcasting yourself. So
Right.
just adopt social media. Go sign up and make your Twitter.
Sure, sure. I believe, yeah, because, yeah, guys, his social media link is in description. Connect with him. He's posting a lot of informative and useful content in a very, you can say, in a very uh, entertaining way, because that is what I believe you love to do, so that make the learning easy for each and everyone. And I just want to like share that I totally agree, be a part of community. That is what even what I did in last 6 years. And I moved to the multiple places when back the days I was in India, different part of India. And when I moved here in Singapore, that's where I also participated the local user group. It's again pre-pandemic time. I deliver a one talk there. Then I try to join the GCP group, and like a GDGs are there. So yeah, it really helped. It really helped me to also to meet a lot of like-minded people, to understand it's not that learning in isolated will make sense. That is, I believe, the very important thing which you have shared. So yeah, really, I really like to thank you for giving this opportunity to talk with you, and hope in the near future we will plan such more sessions. And before closing the session, I request everyone, please feel free to share your feedback to me as well as Andrew, and what kind of more content you would like to see. And yeah, and stay safe. Take care.